James Everett stood at the panoramic window of his luxurious mansion, absent-mindedly stroking his perfectly trimmed beard. His gaze wandered over the immaculately manicured garden, but his thoughts were far from the beauty of the nature outside the window. "Something's not right here," he muttered to himself as he watched his wife Olivia stroll through the garden with her phone to her ear, clearly engrossed in a lively conversation. James frowned, trying to lip-read what she was talking about. To no avail. Suddenly Olivia looked away, as if sensing his gaze on her, and quickly ended the conversation. "More secrets," James sighed, stepping away from the window. He made his way to his office and sank heavily into a leather chair. A stack of financial reports lay in front of him, but business was the least of his worries right now. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," James said, straightening up and trying to put a casual expression on his face. The door opened and Olivia walked into the office. Her long, dark hair was gathered into an elegant bun and a slight smile played across her face. "Honey, have you seen my blue scarf? I wanted to wear it tonight." James looked at his wife carefully. "No, I haven't. Where are you going?" Olivia waved her hand carelessly. "Oh, just dinner with Sophia. You remember Sophia, don't you?" "Of course I remember," James nodded. "Your friend, the one who recently got divorced?" "Yeah, she's the one," Olivia confirmed. "She needs some support right now." James rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I see. And how often have you two started seeing each other lately?" Olivia hesitated for a moment but quickly pulled herself together. "Not that often. She's just going through a rough patch right now." "Of course," James said, watching his wife's reaction carefully. "I hope you have a good time." Olivia smiled, but James noticed the smile didn't touch her eyes. "Thank you, darling. Don't stay up too late on the paperwork." She left the office and James leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Something was definitely wrong, and he intended to find out what it was. The next morning, James woke up early. Olivia was still asleep and he took the moment to look through her phone. He didn't find anything suspicious, but that only made him more worried. Perhaps she had another phone. At breakfast, James watched Olivia read the morning paper while sipping her favorite herbal tea. "How was dinner last night?" he asked, as if in between. Olivia looked up from the paper. "Oh, it was fine. Sophia says hi to you." James nodded, sipping his coffee. "By the way, I think we need to update the garden. Maybe plant some new roses or create a Japanese corner." Olivia looked at her husband in surprise. "Since when are you interested in gardening?" James shrugged. "Just thought it would be nice to make some changes. Do you mind if I take over?" "Of course not," Olivia replied. "But do you really have time for that? And what will Frank say?" "Frank deserves a vacation," James said. "I'm thinking of sending him away for a couple weeks to rest. I'll do the garden myself. It'll be therapeutic." Olivia looked at her husband carefully. "Are you sure there's nothing wrong with you? You've never shown any interest in gardening before." James smiled, trying to look as casual as possible. "I just want to try something new. I thought you always said I needed a hobby besides work." "Well, if you're sure." Olivia still looked puzzled, but didn't say anything else. After breakfast, James went to his office and summoned Frank, the gardener. Frank, a stout man in his 50s with a tanned face and calloused hands, entered the office with a perplexed look on his face. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Everett?" James nodded. "Yes, Frank. Have a seat." Frank carefully lowered himself into the chair across from James's desk. "Frank, you've been working for us for how long? 10 years?" "12, sir," Frank replied. 12 years, repeated James. "And in all that time, you've never once taken an extended vacation. I think it's time to rectify that." Frank looked puzzled. "A vacation, sir. But it's the height of the season." James raised his hand, stopping him. "That's exactly why I insist. You deserve a vacation. I want you to take a 2-week vacation. All expenses are on me." Frank frowned. That's very generous of you, Mr. Everett, but who's going to do the garden? You know how Mrs. Everett loves her roses. James smiled. Don't worry about that. I'll take care of the garden myself. Frank's eyes widened in surprise. You, sir? But, pardon my candor, have you ever done any gardening? No, James admitted, but I'm a fast learner, and then it's only for 2 weeks. What can happen in 2 weeks? Frank looked unconvinced, but did not dare to argue with his employer. If you insist, sir. I insist, James said firmly. Take a vacation, Frank. Take a vacation. Get away. And when you get back, you can tell me how the trip went. When Frank left, James leaned back in his chair, pleased with himself. The first step of his plan had been realized. Now he needed to prepare for his role as gardener. The next morning, James was up before dawn. He quietly dressed in an old pair of jeans and a tattered shirt he had bought the day before at a second-hand store. Then he put on a fake beard and wig, transforming himself from an elegant businessman to a simple laborer. Olivia was still asleep when he slipped out of the house and into the garden. It was starting to lighten, and the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft pastel colors. James picked up a shovel and set to work, feeling extremely awkward. He had never done physical labor before, and after half an hour his hands were covered in calluses and his back ached mercilessly. "Hey, who are you?" came a woman's voice suddenly. James turned around and saw Eleanor, the housekeeper. She stood with her arms at her sides and eyed him suspiciously. "Yeah, new gardener," James muttered, trying to speak more gruffly. "My name is Jack." Eleanor squinted her eyes. "And where's Frank?" "On vacation," James answered quickly. "Mr. Everett sent him to rest." Eleanor still looked incredulous. "And why don't I know about this?" James shrugged, trying to look as nonchalant as possible. "I don't know, ma'am. I'm just doing my job." Eleanor studied him for a while longer, then nodded. "All right, Jack. But be warned, I'll be keeping an eye on you. Don't you dare steal anything." "Yes, ma'am," James obediently replied, mentally noting that he needed to be more careful with Eleanor. When the housekeeper left, James breathed a sigh of relief. He had passed his first test, but the day was just beginning. Around noon, Olivia came out into the garden. She was dressed in a light summer dress, and James couldn't help but admire her. Then he reminded himself that he was now a gardener, not a husband, and concentrated on weeding the flower bed. "Hello," he heard his wife's voice. "You must be the new gardener?" James lifted his head, trying not to look Olivia directly in the eye. "Yes, ma'am, Jack." "It's a pleasure, Jack," Olivia smiled. "I hope you enjoy your stay with us. Did Frank leave you instructions?" "Yes, ma'am," nodded James. "Don't worry, I'll take care of the garden." "Great," Olivia said. "If you need anything, feel free to contact me or Eleanor." James nodded, and Olivia headed back toward the house. He watched her follow, feeling a strange mixture of love and suspicion. The day dragged on for an agonizingly long time. James had never realized that gardening could be such an exhausting endeavor. By evening, he could barely stand on his feet. When darkness fell, he slipped quietly into the house through the back door, removed his masquerade, and took a long, hot shower. Then he went down to the dining room where Olivia was already waiting for him for dinner. "How was your day, dear?" she asked. James shrugged his shoulders. "The usual. Lots of work at the office. What about you?" Olivia smiled. "Oh, nothing much. Met the new gardener. He seems to be a good worker." "Really?" James tried to look disinterested. "And what do you think of him?" "Pretty decent," Olivia replied. "A little weird, though, like he was nervous in my presence." James almost choked on his wine. "Nervous? Why would he be?" Olivia shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe just shy. Or it's his first job in such a big house." "Maybe," James agreed. mentally noting that he needed to be more confident in his role. After dinner, Olivia retired to her room citing a headache. James stayed in the living room pretending to watch TV but actually listening to every sound in the house. Around midnight, he heard quiet footsteps on the stairs. Looking out into the hallway, he saw Olivia dressed in a dark jogging suit. "Where are you going so late?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound concerned rather than suspicious. Olivia flinched in surprise. "Oh, James, you startled me. I just thought I'd go for a run. I can't sleep." "At midnight?" James raised an eyebrow. "It's not safe, honey." "Don't worry," Olivia smiled. "I'll just take a couple laps around the house. The fresh air will help me sleep." James nodded, but inside he was seething with suspicion. "Okay, but be careful." As soon as Olivia walked out, James rushed into his office and turned on the security monitor. He saw Olivia take a quick stride, not toward the jogging path around the house, but toward the gate. "What are you up to, Olivia?" he muttered as he watched his wife disappear behind the gate. The next morning, James was in the garden again, disguised as Jack the gardener. He was diligently trimming the hedge when he heard voices coming from the open window of Olivia's second-floor study. "Can't hide it any longer, Sophia," Olivia was saying. "James is starting to suspect something." James strained his hearing, trying not to give away his presence. "You have to be more careful," replied a voice he recognized as that of Sophia, Olivia's friend. "If he finds out—" I know," Olivia interrupted. "But I can't do this anymore. It's too hard." "Just bear with it a little longer," Sophia reassured her. "It'll be over soon and you'll be free." James felt the blood rush from his face. What were they talking about? Was Olivia planning a divorce or something even worse? Suddenly the conversation broke off and James heard footsteps approaching the window. He quickly ducked behind a bush, hoping he hadn't been spotted. "Oh, hello, Jack," he heard Olivia's voice. "How's work going?" James straightened up, trying to look as casual as possible. "It's fine, ma'am. Just trimming the hedge." "Good," Olivia smiled. "Don't overwork yourself in the heat." James nodded, watching Olivia move away from the window. His thoughts were racing feverishly. What was going on? Who else could he question? At that moment, he noticed Eleanor coming out of the house with a basket of laundry. Perhaps she knows something? "Good morning, ma'am," he addressed the housekeeper. Eleanor looked at him suspiciously. "What do you want, Jack?" Well, I'm new here, and I was wondering, does Mrs. Everett get visitors often?" Eleanor squinted her eyes. "Why do you want to know?" James shrugged, trying to look indifferent. "No reason, so I know when it's best not to make noise with the lawnmower." The housekeeper studied him for a while, then apparently decided the question was harmless. "Well, Mr. Everett is often away on business. And Mrs. Everett, yes, she has visitors. Mostly her friend Sophia." "Is there anyone else?" asked James cautiously. Eleanor frowned. "Look, Jack, you're asking too much. Get on with your work and keep your nose out of other people's business." With those words, she turned around and walked towards the clothesline. James sighed. It looked like Eleanor wasn't going to be a useful source of information. The day stretched agonizingly slow. James diligently did his garden chores, but his thoughts were far away. He tried to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but the more he learned, the more confusing the situation became. In the evening, as he was about to finish his work, he noticed an unfamiliar car pull up to the house. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit got out of it. James strained his eyesight trying to make out his face and was surprised to recognize Michael Chen, his business partner. "What's he doing here?" muttered James as he watched Michael quickly enter the house. James crept quietly into the house and stood under the living room window. He heard Olivia and Michael's voices. "All set," Michael was saying. "James doesn't suspect a thing. We can proceed." "Are you sure?" Olivia's voice sounded worried. "I don't want anything to go wrong." Don't worry, Michael reassured her. I've got it all worked out. It'll be over in a week. James felt himself getting dizzy. What were they talking about? What will be over? Were they really planning to kill him? He flinched away from the window, feeling panic overwhelm him. He needed to do something immediately. But what? The next morning, James was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He'd barely slept the night before, mulling over everything he'd learned. His wife and best friend were plotting something against him. But what was it? He was mechanically doing his gardening chores when he noticed Eleanor approaching him. "Hey, Jack," she called out to him. "Can I talk to you?" James nodded, wondering what the suspicious housekeeper could possibly want with him. Eleanor looked around, made sure no one could hear them, and lowered her voice. "Look, I know you're not who you say you are." James's heart sank into his heels. "What are you talking about, ma'am?" "Don't pretend," Eleanor retorted. "I know you're not Jack. You're James Everett." James felt the ground go from under his feet. He had been exposed. What now? How did you know?" he muttered. Eleanor snorted. "I've been working here for 10 years. You think I wouldn't recognize my employer even if he put on a stupid beard?" James swallowed. "So, what now? Are you going to tell Olivia?" To his surprise, Eleanor shook her head. "No, I want to help you." "Help? But why?" Eleanor sighed. "Because I think there's something fishy going on here, too. I've heard conversations, seen strange visitors. Something's going on, and I don't like it." James felt a surge of hope. "What have you heard? What do you know?" "Not here." Eleanor shook her head. "Meet me tonight at the garden cottage. I'll tell you everything I know." With those words, she turned and walked towards the house, leaving James in a complete state of confusion. All day long, James had not been able to find a place to go. He looked forward to the evening, hoping that Eleanor would shed some light on what was going on. Finally, as darkness fell, he crept into the garden cottage. Eleanor was already waiting for him there. "So," she began without preamble, "here's what I know. For the last few months, Olivia has been seeing a lot of Michael Chen and some woman named Veronica. They're talking about some papers, some large sums of money, and they keep mentioning some operation that's supposed to happen in a week." James frowned. "An operation? What operation?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know, but they're very careful and they're always checking to see if anyone's eavesdropping." "What about Sophia?" asked James. "Is she in on this too?" "Sophia?" wondered Eleanor. "No, I haven't heard them mention her. But I know Olivia talks to her on the phone a lot." James hesitated. Sophia seemed to be the only person Olivia trusted. Maybe he should talk to her. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said. "You've been very helpful." "Be careful, James," the housekeeper warned. "I don't know what they're up to, but it's obviously something serious." James nodded and walked out of the garden shed, feeling a plan maturing in his head. The next morning, James decided to take action. He called the office and said he was taking time off for family reasons. He then took off his gardener's masquerade and dressed in his usual business suit. "Honey," he addressed Olivia over breakfast, "I'm going to work from home today. Got some important projects to finish up." Olivia looked surprised. "Oh, good. I thought you had an important meeting at the office today." "Canceled," James lied. "And what are your plans for the day?" "Nothing much," Olivia shrugged. "Maybe go shopping." James nodded, pretending to believe it. As soon as Olivia left, he quickly dialed Sophia's number. "Hello?" he heard a familiar voice say. "Sophia, it's James. We need to talk right away. It's about Olivia." A pause hung on the other end of the line. "James? What's wrong?" "Not on the phone," he said. "Let's meet in an hour at the cafe on Maple Street." Sophia agreed, and James hurried to the meeting. When James arrived at the cafe, Sophia was already waiting for him at a table in the corner. She looked anxious and was nervously rubbing her napkin. "James, what's going on?" she asked as soon as he sat down. "You scared me." James took a deep breath. Sophia, I know you're Olivia's best friend, and I'm hoping you can help me figure out what's going on. Sophia frowned. What are you talking about? Olivia is hiding something from me, James began. She's always going somewhere, whispering on the phone. I heard her talking to you about something she can't hide anymore. Sophia, I need to know, is my wife cheating on me? Sophia looked shocked. What? No, James, how could you think that? What else would I think? Exclaimed James. I saw her going out with Michael Chen. They were talking about some kind of operation, large sums of money. What's going on, Sophia? Sophia turned pale. She looked around as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping, then leaned closer to James. James, I shouldn't tell you this. Olivia would kill me. But you have to know. She's not cheating on you. It's more complicated than that. James felt his heart beat faster. What do you mean? Sophia took a deep breath. Olivia. She's working undercover, for the FBI. James felt his jaw drop. What? The FBI? But how? Why? It started about a year ago, Sophia began. The FBI got onto Olivia because they suspected something illegal was going on in your company. Money laundering, insider trading, something like that. They asked Olivia to help investigate. James felt the room begin to spin around him. But that's impossible. I would know if something like that was going on in my company. Sophia shook her head. They think it's being done without your knowledge. Olivia agreed to help to prove your innocence. And Michael Chen? Asked James, feeling his world crumbling. He's an FBI agent, Sophia replied. He's working with Olivia. James leaned back in his chair, trying to comprehend what he had heard. His wife is an undercover FBI agent? His company is under suspicion? This was too much. Why didn't she tell me? He muttered. She couldn't, Sophia replied softly. It would have jeopardized the whole operation, and you too. James shook his head. I can't believe that. Are you sure, Sophia? This isn't some kind of mistake. Sophia placed her hand on his palm. I realize this is a shock, James, but I'm telling the truth. Olivia is doing this for you. She loves you and believes in your innocence. James sat in silence, trying to digest the information. His thoughts were racing feverishly. If what Sophia was saying was true, then who was behind the illegal operations at his company? What do I do now? He asked finally. Sophia squeezed his hand. Nothing. You don't have to show you know. The operation is in its final stages. It should be over in a week. James nodded, feeling completely lost. Thank you, Sophia. I need to think about it. He stood up and walked out of the cafe, barely noticing where he was going. His mind was in complete chaos. James spent the next few days as if in a fog. He continued to play the role of gardener, watching over the house and Olivia, but now his perspective had completely changed. He was noticing details that he had missed before. How Olivia always checked to make sure she wasn't being followed before making a phone call. How she used code words when talking to Sophia. James now suspected it was a code name for her handler at the FBI. How she discreetly photographed documents in his office when she thought he couldn't see. But the question that plagued him the most was who in his company might have been involved in illegal activity. James began his own investigation. He spent nights going through financial records, reviewing every transaction, every contract. He looked for any discrepancies, any signs of manipulation of the numbers. On the third night, he found what he was looking for. Small discrepancies in reports that individually seemed insignificant but added up to huge sums disappearing from the company. And all the threads led to one man, Victor Rodriguez, the company's CFO. James was stunned. Victor had worked with him since the company's inception. He was not just a colleague, but a friend. How could he betray his trust? James now understood why the FBI was suspicious of his company. Victor was a master of his craft. He had manipulated the numbers so cleverly that even James, who knew his business inside and out, wouldn't have noticed it without a thorough check. But what to do with this information now? Tell Olivia? Go directly to the FBI? Or try to confront Victor himself? James decided he had to proceed cautiously. He couldn't risk disrupting the FBI's operation, but he also couldn't sit idly by, knowing that his friend and colleague was stealing from the company. The next morning, James decided to follow Victor. He called the office and said he was working from home again. He then put on his most inconspicuous suit and drove to the company office. He parked on the opposite side of the street and waited. Around noon, he saw Victor leave the building and get into his expensive sports car. James cautiously followed him, trying to keep his distance. Victor drove through the city, looping between streets as if checking to see if he was being followed. Finally, he pulled up outside an unremarkable office building in an industrial neighborhood. James parked around the corner and watched Victor enter the building. A few minutes later, he saw another car pull up. Out of it stepped a man in an expensive suit that James didn't recognize. James's heart beat faster. He felt he was getting closer to solving the mystery. But what to do next? At that moment, his cell phone rang. James flinched and looked at the screen. It was Olivia. "Hello?" he answered, trying to make his voice sound normal. "James, where are you?" Olivia's voice sounded worried. "I called the office, but they said you were working from home. But you're not home." James felt a chill run down his spine. What should he say? I just decided to take a walk," he lied. "Needed to clear my head. A lot of work lately." A pause hung on the other end of the line. "James," Olivia finally said, "we need to talk. It's important. Can you come home?" James hesitated. He was so close to figuring it out, but Olivia's voice sounded really serious. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll be there in half an hour." He hung up the phone and looked once more at the building where Victor had entered. What was going on in there? And what did Olivia want to talk about? James could sense that events were beginning to spiral out of control. He had to act, and act fast. But how? He started the car and slowly drove home, his mind working feverishly, trying to find a way out of this difficult situation. As James pulled up to the house, he saw an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway. His heart clenched. Who else was here? He entered the house and heard voices coming from the living room. One belonged to Olivia, the other was male, but James couldn't recognize it. "Olivia?" he called out, entering the room. Olivia was sitting on the couch. Next to her was a middle-aged man in a strict suit. At the sight of James, both stood up. "James," Olivia looked tense. "This is Agent Michael Chen from the FBI." James felt the ground go from under his feet. So it was true. Everything Sophia had said was true. "Mr. Everett," Agent Chen held out his hand. "We need to talk." James mechanically shook the agent's hand, his thoughts racing feverishly. What should he do? Admit what he already knew about the investigation? Tell him what he'd learned about Victor? "James," Olivia said softly, "please sit down. We have a lot to tell you." James sank into the chair, feeling completely lost. "Mr. Everett," Agent Chen began, "for the past year we have been conducting an investigation regarding possible financial criminality in your company. We had reason to believe that someone in upper management was involved in money laundering and insider trading." James nodded. "I know," he said quietly. Olivia and Agent Chen exchanged surprised looks. "You know?" interjected Olivia. James sighed. "I guessed it. Or rather, Sophia told me." Olivia looked shocked. "Sophia? But how? Why did she tell you?" "Because I asked her," James replied. "I noticed you were acting strange. I even dressed up as a gardener to keep an eye on the house." Now it was Olivia and Agent Chen's turn to look shocked. "You were a gardener?" exclaimed Olivia. "James, how could you?" How could you keep from me that you worked for the FBI? Parried James. I thought we trusted each other. I wanted to tell you, Olivia looked upset. But Agent Chen said it could jeopardize the operation, and you too. Agent Chen cleared his throat, drawing the attention of both spouses. I realize this is a difficult situation for both of you, but right now, we need to focus on the case. Mr. Everett, you said you know about the investigation. What else do you know? James took a deep breath. It was time to reveal all the cards. I know who is behind the financial fraud in my company, he said. It's Victor Rodriguez, my CFO. Olivia and Agent Chen exchanged quick glances. How do you know that? Asked Agent Chen, pitching forward. James recounted his own investigation, the nights he'd spent studying the financial reports and how he'd tracked Victor down to the strange encounter in the industrial district. When he finished, a heavy silence hung in the room. James, Olivia finally uttered, her voice shaking. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Parried James. We were both keeping secrets, Olivia. I thought you were cheating on me. I didn't know what to think. Olivia shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I would never cheat on you, James. I love you. Everything I've done has been for you, for our family. James felt his heart clench. He reached out and took Olivia's palm in his. I know. I realize that now. I'm sorry for doubting you. Agent Chen coughed, reminding him of his presence. Mr. and Mrs. Everett, I understand that you have much to discuss, but right now we have a more pressing problem. The information you have provided, Mr. Everett, confirms our suspicions about Victor Rodriguez, but we need hard evidence to arrest him. James nodded. What do you suggest? We have a plan, Agent Chen said, but we'll need your help to carry it out, both of you. They spent the next hour discussing the details of the operation. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance to catch Victor red-handed. James was to schedule an emergency board meeting for the next day. At that meeting, he would announce a surprise audit of all the company's financial transactions over the past year. This was going to make Victor nervous and make a mistake. Olivia, using her cover as James's wife, was to accidentally hear about this audit and secretly inform Victor, hinting that he had a chance to cover his tracks before the audit began. The FBI would be watching Victor's every move, hoping to catch him attempting to destroy evidence or transfer illegally obtained funds. This is dangerous, James said, looking at Olivia. I don't want to put you at risk. Olivia squeezed his hand. I can handle it, James. I've been trained. And then Agent Chen and his team will be around. James nodded, but there was still a look of worry in his eyes. There's something else, Agent Chen said. We suspect Victor has an accomplice in law enforcement, someone who is warning him of our actions. So we have to act quickly and keep things under wraps. How do we know who that accomplice is? Asked James. Agent Chen smiled grimly. We have a plan for that as well. But the less you know about it, the safer it is for you. With that, they ended their discussion. Agent Chen left, leaving James and Olivia alone. As soon as the door closed behind the agent, Olivia threw herself into James's arms. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I hated lying to you. James hugged his wife tightly. I understand why you did it. I'm just glad the truth is finally coming out. They stood hugging for a long time without saying a word. Finally, Olivia pulled away and looked James in the eye. Did you really dress up as a gardener? She asked with a slight smile. James gave an embarrassed chuckle. Yeah, not my best idea, although I have to say that gardening has turned out to be surprisingly therapeutic. Olivia laughed, and James felt the tension of the last few weeks begin to let go of him. You know, Olivia said, when this is all over, we need to have a serious talk about trust and openness in our relationship. James nodded. You're right. No more secrets between us. No secrets, Olivia confirmed. Now let's get ready for tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do." The next morning started early. James and Olivia had barely slept the night before, discussing the details of the upcoming operation and trying to anticipate every possible scenario. James arrived at the office earlier than usual. He called his secretary and asked for an emergency meeting of the board of directors. "Is something wrong, Mr. Everett?" the secretary asked, clearly concerned. James shook his head. "Nothing's wrong, Sarah. It's just that there are some important matters that need to be discussed immediately." While Sarah was calling the board members, James sat in his office, tapping his fingers nervously on his desk. He knew there were FBI agents watching the building, ready to intervene at any moment. But that didn't lessen his anxiety. Soon there was a knock at the office. It was Victor. "James," he said as he entered, "I hear you're calling an emergency meeting. Is something wrong?" James looked carefully at his CFO and sometime friend. Victor looked calm and collected, but James noticed a slight tension in the corners of his eyes. "It's okay, Victor," James replied as casually as possible. "It's just that there are a few matters that need the council's immediate attention." Victor nodded, but James could see that he wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer. "Perhaps I should have some financial reports ready for the meeting?" suggested Victor. "No need," James said. "We already have all the information we need." Victor nodded once more and left the office. James exhaled. The first part of the plan was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in Victor's mind. Meanwhile, Olivia was waiting at a coffee shop not far from the office. She glanced nervously at her watch, waiting for a call from Agent Chen. Finally, her phone rang. "All set," Agent Chen said. "Go ahead." Olivia took a deep breath and dialed Victor's number. After a few beeps, he answered. "Victor, this is Olivia Everett. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you. It's regarding James and company. Can you meet me at Cafe Marco's in 15 minutes? A pause hung on the other end of the line. "Of course, Mrs. Everett. I'll be there." Olivia hung up the phone and looked at Agent Chen, sitting at a nearby table in plain clothes. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. 15 minutes later, Victor entered the cafe. He took a quick look around the room and made his way to Olivia's table. "Mrs. Everett," he said, taking a seat across from her. "What's wrong? You look worried." Olivia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Victor, I overheard James talking. He's planning a full financial audit of the company, a sudden and comprehensive one. I thought you should know about it." Victor turned pale. "An audit? But why? I mean, our finances are fine." Olivia shook her head. "I don't know the details, but James seemed very serious. He said something about discrepancies in the reports." Victor swallowed. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Everett. I should get going. I need to get the paperwork ready for the meeting." He stood up quickly and walked out of the cafe. Olivia escorted him out with a glance, then looked at Agent Chen. He nodded and followed Victor out the door. Back in the office, Victor went straight to his computer. He was frantically going through the files, trying to find a way to cover up the evidence of his machinations. At that moment, James walked into his office. "Victor," he said, "the meeting starts in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" Victor flinched and quickly closed all the windows on his computer. "Yes, of course, James. I'm on my way." They headed together to the conference room where the rest of the board of directors had already gathered. James began the meeting, trying to speak as confidently and calmly as possible. "Gentlemen, I have called this emergency meeting because I have reason to believe that there are serious financial irregularities going on in our company." A whisper of surprise and concern swept through the room. Victor sat motionless, his face white as chalk. "I suggest we immediately begin a full financial audit of all of the company's operations over the past year," James continued. "We need to make sure our finances are clean and transparent." "But James," one of the directors intervened, "didn't Victor just have an audit done? He assured us everything was in order. All eyes turned to Victor. The man coughed and tried to smile. Yes, he did. But if James feels it's necessary to do further testing, I fully support that decision. James looked at Victor carefully. Thank you for your support, Victor. In that case, I suggest we begin the inspection immediately. Right now. Victor turned even paler. Right now? But James, wouldn't it be better to prepare? Gather all the necessary documents. Why wait, Victor? Asked James, looking intently at his CFO. If everything is in order, then we have nothing to fear, right? Victor opened his mouth to say something, but at that moment the conference room door swung open. Several men in suits entered the room, among whom James recognized Agent Chen. Gentlemen, I apologize for the intrusion, Agent Chen said, showing his ID. I'm Agent Michael Chen of the FBI. We have a warrant to search and seize all financial records of the company. Chaos reigned in the room. Directors jumped up from their seats demanding explanations. Victor sat motionless, his face gray with shock. James stood up. Gentlemen, please remain calm. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding, and we'll figure it out. Please cooperate with the FBI agents. As the agents began the process of seizing documents and computers, James noticed Victor stealthily trying to slip out of the room. Victor, James called out to him, where are you going? Victor froze. Then suddenly he rushed toward the door, but there were already 2 FBI agents waiting for him there. Victor Rodriguez, Agent Chen said, approaching him. You are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud, money laundering, and insider trading. As the agents read Victor his rights and handcuffed him, James stared at the man he once considered a friend. He felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and sadness. The next few hours passed like a blur. FBI agents seized numerous documents and computers. James answered endless questions from both agents and shocked board members. Finally, as it was beginning to get dark, James was able to leave the office. He felt exhausted, but at the same time felt strangely relieved. The truth had finally come out. At home, Olivia was waiting for him. As soon as he walked in, she threw herself into his arms. How did it go? She asked. James took a deep breath. Victor was arrested. The FBI seized all the documents. It's going to be a long process, but it's over. Olivia hugged him tightly. You did good, James. You did the right thing. They sat down on the couch and James told Olivia all the details of the day. When he was done, they sat in silence for a while, holding hands. What now? Asked Olivia finally. James shook his head. I don't know. The company has a long recovery process ahead of it. Reputations have suffered, the stock will drop, but we'll get through it. The important thing is that the truth is out. Olivia nodded. What about us, our family? James looked at his wife. We'll get through this too. These weeks have been difficult, but they've shown me how strong and loyal you are. I love you, Olivia, more than I ever have. I love you too, Olivia replied, snuggling up to him. And I'm proud of you, James. You weren't afraid to face the truth even when it hurt. James smiled. You know, there is one positive thing in this whole story. What's that? Asked Olivia. I discovered that I'm pretty good at gardening, James grinned. Maybe it will become my new hobby. Olivia laughed, and James felt the tension of the last few weeks begin to let go of him. There was a lot of work ahead of them and possibly new challenges. But right now, in this moment, sitting next to his wife and knowing that there were no more secrets between them, James felt like he could handle anything. Outside the window, the sun was setting, coloring the sky in bright shades of orange and pink. It felt like a new beginning, James thought. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another, more honest and open. Why don't we have some wine in the garden? He suggested to Olivia. I want to show you how beautifully the roses I planted are blooming. Olivia smiled and nodded. Together they walked out into the garden, holding hands ready to face the new phase of their lives.